Hi, I'm Chris Wilson. I've been collecting Magic the Gathering cards for 32 years now. I've done a couple of videos about my collection so far. In the first one, I showed some of the rare misprints and test prints that I have acquired over the years. In the second video, I showed some parts of my non-basic land collection, where I'm 33,000 cards into collecting one of every non-basic land printed up until the end of 2021, in every language, every edition, foil, non-foil, basically every unique printing. After I posted these videos, a few people who know the true extent of my collection asked me why I haven't made a video about the good stuff yet. At first I was somewhat affronted, as I'd like to think that the stuff I've shown so far is the good stuff, but I know what they meant. They meant the old cards. And the reason I haven't done a video on that stuff is I've been really nervous about showing that part of the collection. It's something I've been really private about over the years, and I've been collecting these cards mostly for myself. It kind of reached an embarrassing level, like a really well-organized hoard. But in this video, I'm going to swallow that embarrassment and show you the good stuff. You might even get to see a Black Lotus. But first I'm going to tell you a story. So I started playing Magic back when I was 11, and at the time the set that was out in New Zealand was revised. And here are some examples of really iconic cards from that set, Lord of the Pit and Shivan Dragon. These are the kind of things that as an 11-year-old boy you really want to open. They're big flying creatures, they win games. I also really love Vesuvan Doppelganger. This one can change so that it copies another creature and can change at will. And so if they play a big Shivan Dragon, you can just clone it yourself. And at the time, it was really hard to get cards before revised in New Zealand. Older cards just didn't make it over. Now, there were some bits and pieces. For example, I managed to get a hold of a Merfolk Assassin and Warbarge from the Dark. This was a set, I think the expansion that was out just before revised, pretty hard to get in New Zealand. People had to basically bring cards from the States in order for you to see it. This particular combo, of course, appealed to me as a kid. This Warbarge lets you give a creature Island Walk, ostensibly so that you can attack the opponent without them being able to block. And of course, Merfolk Assassin lets you destroy creatures with Island Walk, so combined together, it lets you destroy any arbitrary creature, and I just love this combo. Also from the Dark, I managed to get a hold of a Leviathan in a similar theme to these big Timmy creatures. This is a giant 10/10 trample with the drawback. And so I really love cards from the Dark, and I managed to get a few as a kid. Going back in time slightly, I tracked down a red mana battery from Legends. This one lets you store up mana for later turns, but there were not very many Legends cards available. These were the things of Legends, essentially. From Antiquities, I managed to track down a single Urza's Power Plant, and to this day, this is my favorite art of that card that has 4 variations. But unfortunately, Urza land like this only generates additional mana if you have the full set out, the mine, the tower, and the power plant. And so I spent a very long time looking to try to get more of these cards, but I only ever got the one Antiquities card. Now, they eventually printed the Urza land again in a reprint set called Chronicles, and I was able to complete my set of them, but the other ones I got just weren't as cool as this original one. Now, the card that I was most excited to have as a kid was this common. This is a card called Twiddle, which is a common from Alpha, and Alpha cards were the absolute oldest Magic cards. And this thing, you know, it was probably only worth cents in the States, but in New Zealand, this thing was really, really hard to get. It's the only Alpha card I actually saw for 10 years after that point. No one else had managed to get any, and I found it in a trade binder in a store and managed to buy it. And so I was super happy. And to show you an example of the difference between these revised cards and Alpha, it goes through a few other sets. So for example, these are the equivalent cards in Unlimited, which is the main core set before revised, and you can see some color differences, right? Revised is a bit paler, Unlimited's honestly a bit harder to read, and so a lot of people can't tell the difference at first glance between revised and Unlimited cards, but experienced players, of course, will understand the progression that leads all the way back to the iconicness of Alpha with its thick black edges and round corners, and this is the kind of thing that triggers something in people's minds, of course. Now, eventually, as a kid, I managed to get my collection to the point where I was able to acquire a complete set of revised dual lands. And this was, I mean, I'm sure Magic players will understand the importance, but as a kid, this was my pride and joy. And I vividly remember like putting them in hard cases and carrying them around with me at school just to, because I didn't trust them being left at home. I needed to have them with me at all times. And I was very proud of my revised dual land collection. Now, this isn't the same set of cards. This is some ones that I fished out of my collection today. I eventually traded my revised dual land collection in a really bad deal for the better part of a Merfolk deck a few years later. I did not make good decisions back then. So fast forward 9 years to when I was at university. I literally stumbled upon the campus Magic the Gathering Club and got back into the game heavily. But now I had the income from my job and can actually buy all the cards I dreamed of as a kid. I spent the next 23 years acquiring collections of old Magic cards whenever a good opportunity arose. My favorite cards were all the ones that were released before revised, because those are the ones I idolized as a kid and thought I'd never actually be able to own. I'll show you what I've collected. I'm going to start with a set before revised and go back through time from there. So this is the Dark, and while it's my favorite set, it's not everyone's. There are only a few good cards in here. Most of the cards are pretty bad. Out of the cards I'm showing you today, many of them are very powerful old cards. Unfortunately, the Dark does not have very many of those powerful ones. Now, you'll notice that there are multiple copies of each card here, and this is because I've collated together many people's collections as I've acquired them over the years. And this set and all of my other ones here are sorted first by color and then by alphabetical within that color. And so this means that if I need a particular card, for example, I'm looking for a copy of Fire and Brimstone for a deck, though I would never do that, then I can find my copies here and assess which one I want to run. I've got all of this tracked in a super spreadsheet that lists, for every old card, how many copies I've got and where they're stored and so on. Now, I mentioned in a previous video that I spent all of 2024 sorting Magic cards. And people thought this was an exaggeration, but no, I did spend the vast majority of that year getting everything perfectly in order and catalogued. It's not only my OCD, it's also a matter of actually being able to do the collection justice, because when it's just, a facility full of random cards, it is less interesting as a museum than when it is actually a properly sorted, archive of some of the oldest Magic cards. So this next set is Legends. I'll be starting with these blue cards and moving forwards. And this is a gigantic set. It's got like 310 cards in it. And this is way more than most of the other old sets. For example, the Dark only had around 100 unique cards. And there's some power in here. For example, Reset is a really good card that's used in, High Tide and Legacy, for example. A lot of the cards in here are very powerful. But there's also a whole bunch of random unknown stuff. The joke I have with my friends is every day is spoiler season when you're dealing with Legends. Like, what does Sea King's Blessing do? People just don't know half of these cards, mostly because they're just so niche and weird. But, there are quite a lot of powerful, awesome effects that are used in a lot of Vintage and Legacy decks. Now, I picked up a lot of these cards by getting them from collectors, as I mentioned, and I kind of became the guy in New Zealand where if someone wanted to sell out their Magic cards, they'd have a chat with me to potentially pick them up. And so I had a lot of evenings I'd be going to people's houses, and these are people in their 40s with kids that are just looking to free up a bit of cash by getting rid of their old Magic collection that they were passionate about when they were younger. And so I met some really cool people and had some great conversations, and it's really interesting to see how people's lives have moved on from Magic to other interests, whether it's other card games or whether they've taken up board games with their adult friends and so on. And so I never turned down an opportunity to go and check someone's collection out, even if I never ended up buying it. Now, of course, when I'm traveling overseas, I got a chance to, often traveling for work, I got a chance to go and meet up with people from other countries and see their cards, and they had significantly more impressive collections. Some of the best vintage cards I've got have been from, a quick sneaky trip to buy some stuff while I was at GDC or, DICE or various other conferences or Path of Exile press tours. After we finished our obligations, I'd often head out and meet up with some locals to see what cards that they were willing to trade or sell. Over time, I also managed to participate in some charity auctions. It was relatively common, potentially for tax reasons. I'm not sure what the motivation is, but people would often sell their sets as a charity thing. And of course, that means that when I'm buying them for my collection, I get to help the charity as well as helping the hoard of Magic cards that I'm accumulating. So this next set is Antiquities, which is an artifact-themed set that I have quite a soft spot for, partly because it has some really cool lands that I really like. It's not a very large set, it's only around 100 cards, so it's much easier to put together a full set of than something like Legends that just goes on and on forever. And I spoke about how, throughout those years, I was collecting as many Magic cards as I could, but there was a period where I just couldn't afford to collect any more cards. When we were developing the game Path of Exile towards the end of its development, prior to its initial release, money was very tight, and we had to prioritize being able to make payroll. And so I had to dramatically slow down the acquisition of new cards to finish sets. And also, in some cases, I actually sold some of my Power 9 cards in order to fund the company because we were running that low on money. Now, thankfully, in 2012, once we were able to monetize the game, things were okay, and I was able to resume collecting Magic cards. But there was a period there where I was actually parting with more cards than I was buying in order to be able to keep the funding going. This land here, Mishra's Factory, in the Winter Edition, is one of my favorite lands. I just think it looks really cool. And this is a staple in old school. A lot of modern old school decks have 4 copies of this. And so it's really nice to be able to break out, Winter Factories for that. And of course, Mishra's Workshop is a very famous artifact accelerant that's used in a lot of decks as well. Strip mine has 4 different images. You'll see there are differences between these, and so you get to choose what you want your strip mines to look like if you're playing with that in your deck, though it is a card that's generally restricted to just 1 copy. And then, of course, the Urza land that I showed before, there's quite a lot of these in this collection now because there are 12 different types due to all of the different art that they use. So this next set is Arabian Nights. As you can see, we've got Aladdin's lamp and Aladdin's ring and so on. And this is actually Magic the Gathering's oldest expansion. It's a 100-card set that came just after Unlimited and was the first of the expansions released. It was one that was meant to have a different card back, but at the last minute they decided to standardize it on the one that was used in Alpha and Beta and so on. Now, people often ask me how I store my cards, and at face value, the answer is in a whole lot of long boxes. Basically, I have hundreds and hundreds of these just full of cards which are identified by specific numbers, so I understand where each one is and what's in it, and have a list of the contents for easily finding stuff. I've also got a bunch of folders that I use for showing completed sets, which is quite nice. It takes up a lot more room, and these are stored at a facility that I have developed off-site, which is a safe place to store cards. No one knows where it is. The stuff is safe from fire, safe from theft. It's insured. It's a nice place to go and chill with my cards. Unfortunately, it's a bit lonely because I don't want people to know where it is, so it means when I go there to sort stuff, I've kind of got to do it alone with an audiobook. But overall, it's quite a fun visit to make every now and then. Now, Arabian Nights has some of the most powerful lands in the game. For example, this is Bazaar of Baghdad, which has a ridiculous effect of when you tap it, you get to draw 2 cards, which is insane, and then discard 3, which can also be insane if you have a good reason to discard cards. And so City of Brass is still used in many decks these days. It's a great way of getting any color of mana. Desert is an interesting one because it has 2 variations. There's the regular desert, and there's also what's called the Mirage variation. I wonder if I can find one here. Maybe it's in the next pile. So the Mirage variation has a white dot visible in the art, which is basically, it's basically a dot on the print sheet that makes it distinct, but people call it the Mirage because it's something off in the distance of the desert. And so I have both versions distinct here. In fact, yeah, you can see it there. There's the Mirage dot in these ones that are towards the back. And now every card in Arabian Nights, of course, is on the sheet multiple times. This just happens to have a distinguishing mark so you can see exactly which one it is. Now, one of my favorite lands from Arabian Nights is Diamond Valley. I just love the art, and there's a collector out there who has the BGS Black Label 10 Diamond Valley, and it just taunts me because, I can't afford to buy it from him. I just don't want to spend the money, but it's just there, and I don't have it. And that's the nice thing about collecting. There's cards that are your goal, and you want to have them, and sometimes you just don't, and it's aspirational stuff. There are also some wacky lands in Arabian Nights. Island of Wok Wok, for example, it makes a flying creature have no power. It's probably never been legitimately used in a deck. There are very strong ones, like Library of Alexandria, probably the most powerful land ever printed, potentially. Randomly, they decided to include a single basic land, so Mountain is part of Arabian Nights, and so that's a great way of pimping out decks. If you need to use a Mountain, if you're playing mono red, for example, it's possible to play this Mountain rather than one from another set. And embarrassingly, it appears I've accumulated a few of those over the years. And then finally, Oasis, which is low-key one of my favorite pieces of art on a Magic card. So this next set going back in time is Unlimited, which is similar to Alpha and Beta, but has a white border and was meant to be significantly more available, and hence Unlimited cards are pretty cheap compared to Alpha and Beta ones, though of course they're still moderately hard to track down overall. Now, people often ask me what the weirdest Magic card story I have is, and so I have a story for you. So basically, I was planning to head to MagicCon Vegas a number of years ago, and because I was coming from New Zealand, I needed to bring some US dollars with me to buy cards. And they have a limit where if you travel with more than $10,000 between countries, you need to declare it to customs as you do so, because they want to, check for money laundering and drug trafficking or whatever it is they need to check, to make sure people aren't transporting too much money they don't know about. Now, it's no problem to bring the money, you just have to absolutely declare it. So I filled out the New Zealand paperwork and the American paperwork, and when I got to the New Zealand Customs, I said, hey, I've got a bunch of money in my bag, let's talk about it. And I handed them the paperwork, and they interrogated me. They wanted to know what houses I owned, they wanted to know how long I'd had them, they looked them up in the database and had problems with my name not being right on one of them or whatever. They interrogated me about my company, they wanted to see proof of a whole bunch of stuff, proof of income, they wanted to see my bank account. I had a full vetting to make sure that I wasn't up to no good. And eventually they said, okay, cool, well, thank you for doing the paperwork. It's good that you declared this. Get on your flight. So I get on the flight, and at no point did they want to see the cash. And so I get off in America. Now, I was apprehensive because this is a foreign country. The customs officers have guns. Like I was pretty apprehensive about doing the same process there. Like, what if the interrogation was worse? Thankfully, America was great. I got off the plane, I queued up, and I said, hey, I've got one of these FinSec forms. I need to declare, the amount of money I've got, so over $10,000. So they took me into a small room, and an agent came in, and he was a pretty intimidating dude, in terms of his posture and that kind of stuff. And he told me to sit there and wait, and asked me why I was transporting cash into the United States, and I explained it, and he passively listened to my story, almost as though he didn't necessarily acknowledge that he understood about trading cards. He just listened to it, and he went to his computer and typed for a long time. And I was getting very worried at this stage. What was he doing? Why did it take so long? Couldn't he just tell me it was okay? And so after a while, the printer that was on his desk spurred into action, and papers came out, and he picked them up and looked at them and brought them over to me and said, hey, look, while you're in town, if you're staying in LA for long, you should go to this card shop here. I printed out a map for you. It's my favorite card shop, and it has baseball cards, which is what I collect, but they might have Magic the Gathering, so best of luck with everything, and sent me on my way. And I thought that was really sweet. So that's my weird story of, getting freaked out during US customs, but it all had a happy ending in the end. So one thing you're going to notice if you've been paying attention is the condition of these cards isn't great. If you look on the side of these unlimited ones, there's quite a lot that has seen a bunch of wear. And you may be wondering where the cleaner cards are. And this is because I've been misrepresenting this. I've been going through these sets saying, hey, look at these old cards that I've got. But these are the surplus ones. The actual cards I've been working on collecting, I've been putting in folders like this. So this is the folded set of the dark. Obviously it takes multiple folders, but we're looking at blue here. And I've basically been assembling, for the dark, 24 copies of as close as possible to near mint as I can get. So the goal with these cards is to be pack fresh. And that means when I'm buying collections from people, I try very hard to get ones that are as clean as possible and to filter those cards out into these folders. And that sometimes means I have to upgrade them. There might be a card in here with a little bit of damage on it. I think these ones are pretty clean. But as I get new cards, I basically swap them in and try to get these sets here to be as clean as absolutely possible. And the 24 sets applies to all of the old expansions. So for example, for Legends, this is the land section here, and I have 24 copies of all of the lands and Legends in as clean condition as possible. So going back to Antiquities, this is the artifact section of it, and this is another expansion I've managed to get 24 really clean sets of. And it's hard to find these cards in this condition, especially something like Candelabra that was recently banned in Legacy in the last week or so. This card is normally heavily played and gets quite a lot of wear on the corners, and so I've been just upgrading this. When I started with my 24 copies, they were completely wrecked, and over time I've been getting perfect ones as I happen to acquire them in collections and combining them into here. The cards I was showing you before were the surplus ones, and that's why the condition was it varied quite a lot, because in some cases, if a card wasn't played much, like for example, Coral Helm, right? Maybe not that many people ever use the card, and so most of the copies are clean, but certain things have received a lot of play, and then it's really hard to find ones that are in good condition. Feldon's Cane, for example, is not a great card, but it was played a fair amount, and so they generally have quite a bit of wear on them. Arabian Nights is an interesting one. As I mentioned with the desert, there are often two print variations. So if we look at Army of Allah here, for example, you see how the one has kind of a white background behind it. This version here has a much darker background, so there's two different copies of it that are distinct. And that means when you're collecting the set, you want to make sure to get both copies. And a surprisingly large number of cards in this set are actually like that, where there are two variations. Here's another one. For example, Moorish Cavalry has a light and a dark version. And I really love going through this set because the art is just so reminiscent of early Magic art. And so you get to see, so many copies of something as iconic as this. And, Charizard is such a famous, I'm sure Rudy from Alpha Investments would appreciate this, but Charizard is just such an iconically old, cool Magic card. Like this particular one, wall of text here, but it basically says you play a sub-game of Magic using what's left of your decks. And you can do Charizards inside Charizards, and it's just a really cool card, and it just makes me feel so happy to go through sets like this and just appreciate the cool old stuff they printed, in my opinion, back when the game was even better than it is today. Of course, that opinion's going to vary. With a set like Unlimited, it would be silly to try to find 24 copies of something like Ancestral Recall, and so I've limited myself to just 12 copies of each of the cards in this set. It was remarkably hard to find 12 clean copies because a lot of cards came from smoking households, for example, where there's like yellow around the corners and so on, and so these white-bordered cards are very, very easy to show wear on compared to some of the black-bordered ones in other expansions. The same principle applies to beta, where I'm limiting myself to 4 clean sets in the folder, and because the pages hold 12 cards, it lets you lay them out quite cleanly like this. Now I do have at least one more complete set of beta if I were to assemble my loose cards together, but because these are the best copies, that 5th set would not be in as good condition, and I like the idea of the cards in these folders being really clean. Like, it just makes it really nice to flick through this piece of Magic history and just see like copies of the cards as though they came straight out of booster packs. So you may be wondering, if I went with 24 folded sets for the expansions, 12 for Unlimited and 4 for Beta, how many folded sets did I go for Alpha? And the answer is 12. I've been collecting Alpha for as long as I can, ever since I was a kid. Whenever I see an opportunity to add cards to the collection, I get them. And I realized that with a lot of work, I'd be able to reach 12 near mint sets. And we're not quite there yet. Like, a lot of these cards have tiny little dots of wear, right? There's a small amount here. That illusionary mask has to be replaced at some stage. And there's a few other cards in here that are like that. But I'm working on it. You know, every time I go to a Magic event, I scour the Alpha, looking for stuff that's really clean. Now, of course, it's tricky because most of the good Alpha cards are graded these days. And so in order to purchase graded cards to crack, you end up paying a premium if they're quite highly graded. And so there's a sweet spot around an 8.5 to 9 where the card has really good folder appeal. It looks very clean, but it's not vastly more expensive than a raw card would be. So I'll give you an example. This is an Alpha Mox Pearl that I bought, which is a 9, and I bought this one at a price where I'm comfortable cracking it to put in the collection. Now, these slabs are designed to be tamper-proof, right? The intention is that if you open it, you know, they're going to know that the card's been tampered with. And I'm going to show you how we open one of these in an efficient way. I've done so many thousands of these that I've got very used to it. Essentially, you get your pliers and you break off the side of the slab like that. Then you take a flat-nosed screwdriver and you put it in here under where the label is and pop it open. At that point, you can take the card out, which is in a little internal sleeve, and you can use a box cutter. This is where you have to be careful because you don't want to box cutter your card live on a YouTube video that you can only record with one recording. Great. So you pop it out very carefully because this is a card that hasn't been touched by humans for a while. That then goes in a sleeve and goes in the folder, replacing one of them. And that card is beautiful. That's just as it came out of a pack. Now we have more of these. Same thing applies. Bit of force there. Bit of pressure here. Now I have mutilated a card one time doing this out of the thousands that I've opened, and I'll pop up a picture on the screen of what happened with that one. There's a funny story there where I took the photo, I sent it to a friend. He posted it on Facebook to some Magic friends of his, you know, to show the mess that I made of this card. And the comment that someone made was, "That guy must be good in bed," which I laughed at and then felt sad about because I destroyed my card. So there is one card that would be practically too difficult to try to upgrade, and that's Black Lotus, Magic's most iconic card. I was able to track down these 12 raw alpha copies back in the day for the folder, but to upgrade them now would involve paying modern prices and cracking slabs, and I do have a couple of really nice slabbed Lotuses. I graded one of these myself, but I'm going to leave them in the slabs. I just can't justify cracking this in order to slightly upgrade one of the copies in the folder. Like other sets, I also have a bunch of loose alpha cards. These are ones that have previously been in the folders in part of the 12 sets, but have been kicked out as I've gradually upgraded stuff. You know, you can see there's a lot of damage on these Moxes, which is why they're not folded, because they're nowhere near mint. I gradually replaced them over time and upgraded them to cleaner copies. And I really love going through this box of loose alpha. It just reminds me of the old days of Magic. And bear in mind, in the first 10 years that I played the game, I saw a single common, and that was the extent of alpha. And so getting to go through this now just it just brings back such strong feelings of my childhood and so much connection to the individual cards. You know, like I remember playing Wooden Sphere in a green deck, and then here we have the original Alpha version, multiple copies of it, and you know how I feel about lands, and so having just raw Alpha dual lands that I can go through like this is just, you know, maybe I'm weird, but it's a very special thing for me. It makes me very happy. Another aspect of my Alpha collection is cards that are signed by their original artist, and I've completed a set of these, and now I'm working my way through my second set, and I'm a handful of cards short. They're relatively difficult ones. You know, it's not that easy to find an Alpha signed Black Lotus these days for a reasonable price. But this is something that I quite like. I normally don't collect signed cards. I normally see them as, you know, like modified or damaged cards, but Alpha is special because this is the original history of the game. These are cards that dictated the future of what was going to happen and set it in motion. If Alpha was bad, the rest of the game would never exist. But thankfully, Alpha captured a generation of people, and that's why we're still playing Magic to this day. And I feel that finding cards that are signed by the original artists is an homage to the work that they put in making such a cool set. Thanks very much for checking out my cards with me. If you enjoyed the video, please like it and consider subscribing. I've got a few other cool cards I'd like to show you in the future. Well, thanks very much, and I'll see you next time.